Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron,
And I'm Brett.
and you're listening to The Last Alliance, a Rings of Power podcast.
We know it's a dangerous business going out your door or when choosing a podcast, but we're glad you've joined our adventure as we discuss The Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power.
And so it begins. All right, welcome to this week's episode. We're talking about episode 4, The Great Wave. Brett, what was your first impressions of the episode?
First impression, obviously, we see the Great Wave. First thing, it's this vision of basically the destruction of Numenor. So it is good to see what the episode's about right up front. Unlike last episode, we get to meet Adar this episode as well, which I think is a huge success. I'm really disappointed that Joseph Mawle, the actor for Adar, isn't coming back for season 2 because I thought he did such a good job this season.
I think this was actually my favorite episode, at least thus far in the season. It could be my favorite of the entire show. We'll see.
Really,
But
really.
I will explain that later on. So let's start off with our good, bad, and great. You want to start it off this time, Brent?
I'll start it off and let's rotate this time. So my good, we have this scene where Elrond jumps in, saves Theo at the last moment. Theo's been off trying to gather supplies from the village. Turns out the orcs have overrun the place and they're looking for the sword hilt. They're turning everything over. They capture Theo. Orc's about to slice his arm off, and I thought it was really well done. We see this splattering of blood everywhere. Turns out it's Elrond who's made his way back from being captured, saves Theo from the orcs, and then we get this slow motion fighting scene. To me, this was different than the slow motion horse riding scene on the beach with Galadriel. It was a little bit more interesting, and to me, it almost symbolized how elves, Legolas and Elrond are able to do so well in battle. It was as if we were seeing the action unfold as the elves see it. Disa singing in the dwarven halls, kind of giving this impression that everything's connected. Even what's happening in Numenor, they're learning about Sauron taking over the Southlands. We go to the Southlands, and then we have this symbolic connection that even what's happening in Khazad-dûm is going to be related to the Southlands eventually. So that was my good.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view, that it wasn't just for cinematic effect. It was to help illustrate how the elves actually interact with their environment, maybe especially while they're fighting, that everything else is in slow motion compared to their perception of it and their ability to react to it. So that's kind of cool to think about. Yeah, and I loved Disa singing. That was kind of cool. I thought that
It was epic.
it sounded pretty. It was a excellent concept. Yeah, definite plus for the show on that one. My good was the plot twist between the Queen and Galadriel. Kind of see that, Galadriel is trying to thwart the Queen. The Queen is calling Galadriel out for, like, who are you? Aren't you just like an outcast vagabond? Like, why should I care what you have to say? Towards the beginning of the episode, then they meet in the dad's chamber, and you can kind of see like some middle ground being established. But even at the end of that exchange, the Queen kind of says, sorry,
See ya.
can't help you. And then Galadriel sails off, and you're like, dang, that's really how it's gonna be. And then Galadriel comes around, and right from behind the curtain.
I was gonna say I liked how the transition of Muriel, flashing back to describing when the tree leaves are falling. It's like the Valar's tears are falling. but it transitions into the courtroom scene where she's telling that to her people now and saying, this is a critical hinge point in our history. What are we going to decide to do?
Very interesting how they were able to bring that all around. I wasn't expecting it when I first watched it, especially not for Farazan to be supporting it. I want to talk about that more later on, though. So, what was your bad?
My bad has to deal with the passage of time in the series. We get a shot of a Region and this giant forge that Celebrimbor referenced to Elrond at the beginning of the series is like 5 feet from the top, like being completed.
Yeah.
And unless the dwarves are cranking out like 7 stories a day, there's just not enough time that could have happened. And we know that every setting in this series is happening at the same time because everyone saw the meteor at the same time. And so everything is tracked from that same point of time. We've only been a couple days' time in the Southlands. There's only been a couple days from Galadriel on the raft. She's only been in Numenor now for 2 days and a night. For me, there's a plot hole in the passage of time.
That's an interesting point because I always took it as, some things like each of the individual storylines don't need to match minute for minute in the show, but you do bring up a good point that they, if that is their intention, they kind of give the viewer a misconception by viewing the stranger fall from the sky all at the same time, or at least what we perceive to be all at the same time.
Yeah, and we know that this series is condensing, we were talking before, it's condensing thousands of years of history into the same chronological timeline. And so it makes sense that it's not going to be perfect, but I don't know why it just bugged me this episode. What was your bad?
My bad, it's not that they did it poorly. It's just that I don't like it. I don't like that there are so many signs pointing to the doomed friendship of Durin and Elrond. Everything that happens nowadays with those two, it just seems like it's just stacking up one more card on the house of cards that is going to tumble down, and each one that gets stacked, you're just like, oh, that's going to hurt when it comes down.
And you're not saying like bad things are, you're saying all these really good friendship building things are happening, and that's to be knocked out.
Exactly. For instance, like the oath that was made on the rock, right?
Oh, it's beautiful.
There's just a lot of things, and Durin's comment of, anger, dwarven anger lasts longer than elven memory. Anyway.
Yeah, is there some foreshadow there? I think so.
Yeah, and it just makes you sad to know what is coming down the road with each, each warm and fuzzy that you get from the two of them is like another ouch, because you know what's gonna come.
When we talked about them a couple episodes ago, it was almost like, oh, do we think that they might break up in the end? Something will happen, and now to your point, it feels like it's going to be painful.
So that was my bad. My great, and this is why it might be the best episode of the season, is this
take 3
episode guesses. Featured absolutely 0 Harfoots, halflings, whatever you want to call any of those lesser beings. Not one scene dedicated to them.
Oh, we do miss our Harfoot friends.
Nope.
So you're gonna love episode 5 when we literally get like a 3.5 minute song by the Harfoots, and it's about them trouncing through the water and the marshes, and you're gonna love that.
Yep, that's usually my bathroom break during the episode.
Mm-hmm.
What was your great though, Brent?
My great is at the close of the episode, and it was actually part of the trailers, if I remember right. But Waldreg approaches Theo, says, "Hey, you stole my hilt, man." And there's a "I'll show you mine if you show me yours" moment where we see that Waldreg has the scar from the sword hilt on his own arm, and this classic line, "Have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron?" I just got goosebumps on my arm just now saying it. Sauron. It's all about Sauron. Where is he? Who is he? When's he going to show up? And I love it.
Yeah, he needed to have a little bit more of a pirate accent, I feel like, to make that really hit home. But yeah, it kind of comes out of nowhere where when you're first introduced to this Waldreg guy, you're like, why does he get airtime on this show?
Like
And
the epitome of like pitiful.
yeah. And now you can kind of see, oh, he's had experience with the hilt. Maybe there's more to this guy. And then, yeah, obviously later on, you see, you little bugger.
Things get dark real quick.
Yep.
Love it. Well, let's get on then with the rest of this episode. Numenor, we're spending time in Numenor. We're going to spend a lot of time in Numenor over the next couple episodes. But what are we doing today in Numenor?
I think that this episode did a great job kind of building up what we'll see later on, which is the division and subsequent destruction of Numenor. And yeah, the opening scene, like we already talked about, kind of set the tone for the whole episode.
We should know that is known. Numenor will be destroyed.
Yes. And yeah, like we were talking about earlier, Matt, can you remind us the timeline of when Numenor is destroyed compared to when the Rings of Power were actually created?
The Rings of Power were created in 1590 of the Second Age. Numenor sank in the year 3319 of the Second Age.
Okay, so quite a bit of time between those as far as like real life. Obviously, that's going to be quite condensed in this series, but yeah, it is, like Brett was saying, a known fact. I do think that the vision is very interesting because it kind of shows, although not a lot of people are privy to that information, it does show kind of what motivates the queen and her father to maybe hold so dear the tenets of the elves and the Valinor, and the Valar. And we don't get to see every aspect of this vision. We also don't get to, probably more importantly, feel what emotions accompany the viewing of this vision in person. And so it's hard to tell, like, is everyone feeling the same thing? Is everyone seeing the same thing? Is it, very clear when viewing this vision that it's basically be friends with the elves or die, like they're trying to point out? Or is that something that the dad has said at one point as like his best guess for how to prevent it? The queen has now adopted that because her dad said it. Anyway, yeah, what do you think about that, Brett? I kind of was confused with, she talks a lot about the saving grace to, the way to avoid destruction for Numenor is to be loyal to the elves. And I'm sitting here thinking, when she says that, why would the Valar care if you are loyal to the elves? Because it's not the elves that are going to sink the island, right? It's the Valar that are going to sink the island. So why would the Valar care if you guys are loyal to the elves or not? Because not too long ago, the Valar hated the elves themselves. So anyway, maybe not hated. That's probably a bit strong, but were at least annoyed with them.
Yeah, and I've got to think that there's a bit of a warped understanding on Muriel and the other citizens of Numenor's part as to what the Valar actually want. Because Muriel professes loyalty to the Valar, what loyalty to the Valar means, and it seems like in order to kind of keep the peace, any loyalty that Muriel did have to the elves is closeted at the moment, because there's just this great I think it's envy. There's probably a bit of envy on the part of the Numenorians, seeing the elves who get to live in Valinor, who get immortality. Perhaps they've gotten a little spoiled. Yeah, we get this sense that she hates Galadriel, she hates all things elves. But then we have some tender moments later on where she's up in the room with her dying father, and we find out that, well, no, she does deep down probably care about what her father believes. She just feels like she can't express.
Yeah, I think that it kind of has to do with, like, well, I'll just say my opinion is I don't think that the Valar really care too much about whether or not the men and the elves are buddy-buddy. I think they would prefer that just because they prefer peace, but I don't think they're like, it's friendship or death, buddy, you know? And I think it more is just being loyal to the elves is maybe another way of saying being loyal to the traditions of the elves, which were given to them and taught to them by the Valar, i.e. they are the traditions and the, law or guidelines of the Valar. So
and it may not be about
to the elves, you're loyal to their traditions, and you're in good graces with the Valar.
I think that's right. And clearly, by the end of the episode, we see the leaves falling from the tree as Galadriel's sailing away. Clearly, the Valar's trying to say, hey, put whatever feelings you've got aside, but you probably need to work with this elf that you're sending away.
Right. All right. And then, but kind of the last thing. Oh, no. Let's talk about one more thing before we get to that. So what are your thoughts on Isildur and that scene when he is on the ship and has this voice that he's hearing and decides, being a mariner is not for me?
So yeah, this is the second time that Isildur's heard this mystic female voice calling out to him, just calling his name Isildur, and it's coming from the western part of the island. I don't think we know what's in the western part of the island. We get some clues from some dialogue this episode that his brother was chasing the west. This real Numenor is out there somewhere, whatever that means. But yeah, Isildur, the perpetual disappointment, the perpetual screw-up, gets himself kicked out of the Sea Guard and his friends with him. They're not too pleased, understandably. They say you'd be better off if you've never been born. I think we're seeing some origin story of why Isildur gets the One Ring and decides, nope, I'm not destroying this. I finally get the power. I'm keeping it, you suckers.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the west is towards Valinor, correct?
Right. I think we're implying that it's the further west you can go, the better, because that's the direction of Valinor.
That's closer to Valinor, yeah. So is it from the western part of the island that he's hearing a voice, or off the west coast of the island that he's hearing a voice?
I think it's coming from the west. We see that the sun is setting and the voice is coming from that way, so we're assuming, that's the western direction. I think his friend Barrendale, whatever, talks about how he and his brother are always chasing the western part of the island.
Okay. I did think, though, this was the first time that I kind of noticed the term that you mentioned, the real Valinor, or sorry, the real Numenor. And, you think, like, what does that mean exactly? I think that it could mean just simply the Numenor that Numenor was meant to be. Like when the Valar handed over this island and made this island, it probably was for a purpose, not only as a gift. It was a gift, but not only as a reward. But I think it had a purpose, and I think that may be what they are referring to as the real Numenor. So anyway, yeah, that's my thought on that. I did think that it's pretty interesting, though, that I think we're going to see more in the second season about what's going on the western side of Numenor, what's going on with his brother, what's his brother been up to. At some point, we have to see the brother, or I would assume. And so, yeah. And then kind of the last thing with Numenor is, so as you know, we're talking about this episode after we've seen this season, right? So when you're watching the episode, you kind of see the Queen's delivery speech and everyone volunteering as like a feel-good moment. Yes,
I will serve.
Yep, you don't really know at that point that Halbrand is the puppet master doing all of the things. And so with that lens now, looking back and rewatching it, you kind of see many instances where Halbrand is kind of manipulating the situation. We'll talk more about that later, but for this particular instance, it makes you wonder, like, is even this part of his grand plan? Is even the patriotic, good, selfless act of helping the men of the Southlands part of his grand scheme? And is it just an effort to root out Adar and his supporters from the Southlands so that Sauron can walk in unchallenged?
I'm torn. I'm really torn. There's part of me that's like, how can someone plan all of this out? There's so much that could go wrong if you're planning on being stuck at sea just to get to Numenor, to be thrown into jail, to, get them all rallied together and head out. Or is he just using what cards are given to him? So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. We do know that in the Tolkien universe, Sauron does whisper into Pharazôn's ear and gets Pharazôn all hyped up on power, and ultimately is the one who drives Numenor to its destruction. So is all of that happening off camera right now, or are we going to see that in a flashback, or maybe even a different scene in season 2, Sauron coming in a different form and talking with Pharazôn? I don't know, but he is there. One thing I thought was interesting in the Queen's speech, she's rallying the people. She's saying, "Where is our valor? Is it buried with our ancestors, or is it here?" And at this moment, it's showing Halbrand walking along the top of the city, looking at the city. She's like, "Is it here among us now?" And it was just this interesting thing, like, ooh, Sauron.
About to burst forth as the rising sun. I loved that part.
If there is any valor to be had.
Well, he's definitely not the valor. Yeah, it is important for those who don't know to make that point of Pharazôn is Sauron's link to Numenor.
Yeah.
He's the guy in the Tolkien universe that Sauron has been whispering into his ear. I don't think you're going to see Halbrand interacting with Pharazôn just because you don't see it this season, and by the end of this season, Halbrand's identity is already, given up as Sauron. So I don't think you're going to see it in the future. Maybe if they have flashbacks and it shows, Sauron as an elf, or Sauron as a man in Numenor talking to Pharazôn or whatever. maybe they'll do something like that. But I don't think they're gonna have Halbrand talking to Pharazôn. At least I don't think so, but maybe.
You do get an interesting
Um,
scene in the dungeon where the tiniest of interactions could give a hint to what's coming. Anything else about Numenor?
oh, I think I was just gonna add that Halbrand is able to use Pharazôn so easily because Pharazôn has this very large drive for power in Numenor, right? And he's got the voice of the people. He's a big influencer among the people of Numenor and has kind of risen on this movement of anti-elf, but is unable to attain the highest level of power because of his birth. And so naturally that requires some plotting. And I think that is the huge window that Sauron has to work with to manipulate Pharazôn to do what he wants him to do. And I think that back to the, my little conspiracy, that this whole thing is part of Sauron's plan. It takes away the queen and it takes away all of the queen's supporters, right? Because that was the call to arms. It wasn't, who is 18 to 21 able-bodied. It was who will go and defend the queen, support the queen in supporting an elf.
So you said at the start of the episode that Pharazôn was supportive of this idea of the queen. Yeah, I think absolutely he's supportive because he gets to stay back home.
Exactly. Even if she lives, she's not there. And so while she's not there, he is the power and can, more freely establish whatever, plot he has to gain more power down the road. And if she dies, even better. Yeah, so next topic, obviously, theme of this season is the quest for Sauron. Who is he? Where is he? What's he up to? And kind of the updates to that quest in this episode I wanted to talk about for a minute. First of all, we did not get any view of the stranger in this episode. And I guess it's just hard to develop so many potential Sauron characters in a single episode because you now have a good handful. But Adar is kind of, as Brett mentioned, was not really talked about in the episode entitled Adar, and we kind of got a little bit more from him in this episode. We noticed that he is an elf or was an elf. He's got elf ears, right? And speaks Quenya. Then he says to Arondir, basically, that he wants to start a whole new world, that he thinks it's a necessity, that only the gods can do that. And he says, I'm not a god. And then says, at least not yet. And it kind of makes you think, it adds on to this could be Sauron, guys, because, like my thinking at least is up to this point, we've been introduced to some pretty egotistical elves, both in the movies, and you definitely get a taste of them in the books and the Silmarillion. Very egotistical characters, right? I don't think any of them would have gone as far as to say, I'm not a god yet.
I'm on my way.
Yeah.
Look out, world, here I come.
Exactly. Just because I think for the most part, they know what that is. Many of them have seen a Valar and know that they're not even in the same league. In fact, there's a whole rung on the ladder between the Valar and the Eldar, the Maiar, right? And so I think that,
Is what
when you hear,
Sauron is.
which is what Sauron is, exactly. And so when you hear that, you're like, okay, maybe he does want to climb the ladder and thinks it's possible to achieve one rung instead of leapfrogging over two.
I remember watching this episode and thinking at that point, this is him. We got him. This is for sure Sauron. And then about 10 minutes later, we get some quotes from Halbrand. I'm like, oh, it's him. It's definitely him.
Yeah. So yeah, and then the development with Halbrand, who we know actually is Sauron, some of the things that came out in this episode, which again, you kind of get more out of it now that you know who he is for sure, that maybe you didn't notice the first time you were watching the episode. But the golden nugget I like out of this from Halbrand is when he's talking to Galadriel about how to handle the situation with with the queen, and they're in their gel cells side by side, and he's like, might I recommend identifying your enemy's worst fears? And Galadriel like immediately jumps in and exploit them.
Exploit them.
And he's like, no, actually, give them a means. Yeah, give them a means to master it. Basically, like give them a solution to the problem they're so fixated on. And he says it allows you to master them. And that is the most succinct, well said mode of operation of Sauron that I have heard. It is exactly how he is treating her. It's how he's dealing with Celebrimbor. It's how he's dealing with Farazan, right? Each one of these people have a weakness, or sorry, not a weakness, but a worst fear that he is giving them the solution to, but the solution is crafted in a way that allows him to be master of them.
Which is exactly what the rings of power are. It's giving these races power over the earth, power over their fears, and then he's going to take power over them with the one ring to rule them all.
Yep. So I thought that was a great revelatory moment. Again, hindsight 2020, obviously, but very well said. Of this is exactly what I'm doing to you right now.
He lays it out perfect, and it goes back to that very first episode, and we talked about it a lot, and I think it keeps coming up. Galadriel gave a lecture which she should have listened to herself. She said, evil does not sleep, it waits, and in our complacency it blinds us. And she's so blind right now. She's so blind.
Yep. And you can totally understand, right? When people have the means and the opportunity to conquer their worst fears, the opportunity to have tunnel vision in that quest is, I mean, depending on what the worst fear is, boundless, right? Like, you want to get that sucker out of there.
She's got an army. She knows they're going to get an army. They're going to get off this island. They're going to go to the Southlands and kick Sauron's butt.
Yep. So anything else you want to talk about for as far as the quest for Sauron at this point in the season, Brett?
No, I think we are looking forward. We know that there's going to be a showdown with Adar in the next episode. That's going to be exciting. I'm really looking forward to our discussion about Adar and Halbrand's conversation. One of my favorite parts of the season, and that's coming up. So
definitely
episode 6.
Yep. So our last topic for this episode, I just found myself having a lot of like random questions as I watched this, and just kind of wanted to bounce it back between us to see what our thoughts were. Some of these might not even have answers, at least not that we know of. Just wanted to get our feel for what we think. So first one is, so Adar is talking about in that little speech to Arondir, he's like, some lies run so deep that even the rocks and the roots believe them, or have started to believe them. What lies do you think he's referring to? Obviously, this is in the context of building a whole new world, possibly one day becoming a god, all that kind of stuff. So what lies do you think Adar is referring to?
He's clearly talking about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. I think it, and I think this is your thought too. I think he clearly feels that there is a place in this world for his orc family, and other Western races may not feel that way. I think that's one of the big drivers for him is, hey, we belong, we have a place, we're going to build a world, and we're going to show the rest of you that we can make a better world, in our humble opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, part of the lie that he's talking about in that vein is, for so long, men and elves and dwarves, all of them have believed that, because the Eldar are the firstborn of Iluvatar, minus the Valar and Maiar, obviously, but kind of the firstborn children of Iluvatar, and they can live forever. They don't need to sleep, all that kind of stuff. They have magic. They're strong. They're smart. Blah blah blah. That they are kind of the end all be all of his creation. And I think that he's trying to say that that has been believed for so long that everyone is starting to take it as truth, and it just isn't. And there is some truth to that. I think they are probably, at least maybe a little bit more favored by Iluvatar, because he certainly gave them a lot more as far as creation goes. But I don't think that they're any more valuable than men. I think that was probably the lie he was referring to. And in your context of, the orcs are just as valued to Iluvatar because he is also granting them breath, just like he does everyone else.
It's a fair point, and it's, again, another thing that will come up in episode 6. We have a philosophical showdown between Galadriel and Adar, and that's a fun confrontation. So maybe we'll get more answers there.
We kind of already talked about the hilt a little bit. I was just curious, when you first viewed the episode, did you have any indication as to what this hilt was all about? Like, I think we knew it had a tie to Sauron, right? But did you have any idea what it was going to actually be used for?
Not at all. It had similarities to the One Ring in that it channels some of Sauron's power. His voice comes out of it. Is there part of his soul in it? Maybe. Zero idea of what it was going to be used for. Although what it is used for is pretty epic.
It is, absolutely. And we talked a little bit earlier about Waldreg's experience with the hilt, right? I think you asked me the question earlier, do you think that, like, how much does Waldreg know exactly about the hilt, about Sauron, about, the whole thing?
He seems like a Sauron fanatic who doesn't really know actually that much about Sauron.
Yeah, you can tell that
pledge his fealty to him.
Exactly. And yeah, you can obviously tell that he has stabbed himself with the hilt at some point. How the hilt went from him to Theo, we're not exactly sure. So, who knows what his connection is. Honestly, my psychoanalysis is that Waldreg just feels like a, worthless, unimportant person, and thinks that his ticket to importance is via the tailcoats of Sauron and the power that he has.
Yeah, he's lost the battle for leader of the town to Bronwyn, and
Yeah.
nobody's ready to follow him quite yet.
Yep.
And he's just a pathetic guy, but that patheticism comes back to drive some pretty dark and sinister actions. I think he's a very interesting character, actually.
He is, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to be of note, whether that note is good or evil, as long as he makes the note.
Well said. Well said.
All right, yeah, next question. You knew the answer to this right out of the gate, but how the heck did Elrond know the password to get into the old mine? Like, Gandalf, a Maiar who's been around for thousands of years, took like a whole night to figure out the password to get into Moria. And here Elrond is, like 2 seconds? And first try opening up this old mine door, which
Yeah.
we didn't even know was a door. Like we
That's
do
right.
at Moria. There was no outline. All we saw was a couple footprints on the floor.
Two things. One, movie magic. Thank heavens for a plot, or else Elrond
Yeah.
could still be sitting there. And two, it's the knocking song, and I caught it. Disa tells the kids running around, stop it with that knocking song, as they're running about the house, and they're saying, polish the gold and silver, and it's a little rhyme to it. And Elrond makes a connection. Why is it called a knocking song? And he knocks to the rhythm and speaks the words of that children's rhyme.
Yeah, and I think it was easy to catch that it was the song that the kids were singing, but what I did not catch was that she called it the knocking song, and that was a good catch on your part. But
I picked it up just today, watching it again.
Yeah, next question. Does the Palantiri, especially this particular Palantiri, only see one thing, the destruction of Numenor? Is it broken, on repeat, like those old
That's what it is.
DVDs used to be, or
it's
what?
like your old VHS, and you just
Yeah.
rewind and you watch it over and over again. Matt, can you give us a brief summary on Palantiri, what they are, why they're significant?
Palantiri are these stones that the elves made that were handed down to the Numenorians. They were originally placed in different parts of the island just so they could communicate with each other. And then Elendil and his sons brought them over to Middle-earth and placed them throughout their kingdoms to do that exact same thing. So they're just a communication device. To answer the question of does it only see one thing, I actually wouldn't be surprised, because we know that the Palantir that Denethor has in The Return of the King, it's marred and scarred to the point where if anyone tries to look into it, all they see are the hands of Denethor around it. So I think it's quite possible that there is only one thing that it sees, and that's the destruction of Numenor.
Very interesting.
Well, we bring this up, I think, because in future episodes, when we get to season 2 and we're giving our live reaction to each episode, we're going to be giving our own Palantiri predictions as part of the podcast. So stay tuned for that. Maybe we'll see more Palantiri show up in the show.
All right. Another question, Brett. So back during the war, right? Because there's a lot of reference made to these men of the Southlands who allied themselves with Sauron and Morgoth. What do you think motivated them to do so?
Man, it's hard to not say that they're just a pathetic group of people that would do that. They would go with the evil group, especially looking at the legacy that's been passed down to our Southlanders nowadays, wearing the wife beaters and milking cows with black grease coming out of it's just a rough looking group of people. But I think it's probably got more to do with, well, similar to Waldreg. This could have been a people who was down on their luck, and it was just a matter of who got to them first and offered them a chance at salvation and a couple rungs up the ladder. And if Morgoth was there first, I think if you're kind of in this group, it's not very glamorous. You say, sure, why not?
True. Yeah, I think that is definitely a possibility. I think also like we know that the plan to make Mordor was around since Morgoth was still in power, right? So the plans for the Southlands by the evil side was, around at that time, and so I'm sure that they had a pretty powerful presence in that area. And it was, I can see a lot of the men of the Southlands being faced with the decision of, join us or die. And, these guys are a mile away. The elves are 10 leagues away. Who am I going to join? And not so much a question of what's right and wrong, but what's going to keep
But bread
me
on it.
living. Yeah.
This idea of join us or die is precisely the message that Adar gives Arondir to give the people. Hey, pledge loyalty to me, or tomorrow night we're going to come wreck the place, which we get to see
Yep.
next
And you
episode.
see how many actually are, yep, no problem. Whatever you want.
Hand me the pen. Where do I sign?
Yep. And yeah, and to the elves' credit, I do think that this is a point where, and the men of Numenor, right? Which is probably why they ended up on the island of Numenor and not as the Friends of Waldreg in the Southlands.
That's the new campaign name, the Friends of Waldreg.
It's a support group. Anyway, I think that those people would have said, I'll fight to the death. I'm not going to lower myself to that filth, Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of. Oh, I do have one more question. So, and this is kind of one that I don't know if we will have a perfect answer to, but it does kind of, I don't know. I doubt I'm the only one who's ever had this question, but you see the elves, you see the dwarves. The elves have quite a bit more magic, I would say, than the dwarves, but the dwarves also have some magic. The men don't have any magic. Gandalf has magic. That's a whole nother topic that really frustrates me about Gandalf and his magic. We'll talk about that another day maybe, but anyway, just what's the source of all this magic? How what laws govern magic in Tolkien's world? And yeah, what do you got for us, Matt?
If we look back at the creator, Iluvatar has all the power in the universe. And then the further we get from Iluvatar, the less magical or powerful we see. So we see the Valar, who are pretty much the same as Iluvatar. Then you have the lesser Maiar like Gandalf and Sauron and the other wizards, and they still have some pretty impressive power.
And Sauron.
And Sauron. Then you see the elves, who, let's see, Elrond can control the river near Rivendell and make a flood happen. He can see into the future a little bit. Galadriel can preserve her elven realm in Lothlorien and has power to protect the elves there. Then you get to people like Aragorn, a descendant of Numenor, and really the best he can do is just heal some people with using weeds, right? Then you get the hobbits, who are just super basic folk. They don't know anything. They think the fireworks that Gandalf make are just the most wonderful thing on earth. And this all comes as a result of the decay that Morgoth put into the earth. So I think the farther you get away from Iluvatar and his immediate creations, the less magic you see in the world, simply because that power slowly diminishes and decays over time.
That's
I
very
like
helpful.
it.
Yeah.
I like it. I think it's important to at least talk about, even though we don't know exactly, a 2 + 2 = 4 answer, so to speak. But as the season progresses, you hear more and more the talk about the power of the unseen world, right? And that's what these rings of power are drawing from. and probably what all of these powerful beings are also drawing from. And I think that in season 2, you're going to see more of their attempt at explaining, what is the power of the unseen world that we've been talking about so much in the last couple of episodes of season 1. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And yeah, I think like Matt is saying, some of the magical beings in Lord of the Rings probably have just a better connection to the unseen world, whatever that means. Who knows? Maybe that means just a better connection to Iluvatar. I don't know, but I think that my gut is that Amazon is going to try and take a stab at explaining that next season.
As we end this episode, we want to leave you with our quote of the week. 2 quotes, actually, both from Durin. One from King Durin, one from Prince Durin. Cameron, why don't you go ahead and give us Prince Durin's quote or insult of the week?
Yeah, so I particularly enjoyed the banter back and forth between Elrond and Durin about how they first met. Obviously, that is a very familiar concept and scene among friends where they both have 2 different recollections of the same event, which paint themselves in a better light than the friends version. And at the end of the banter back and forth, Durin says to Elrond, you wouldn't remember your face if you were gazing in a mirror. And I was like, excellent.
There's some days I wish I could forget my face, even if I was looking in a mirror. That's why this is a podcast and not a YouTube video series.
All right, what's the real one, Brett?
Okay, from King Durin, there's work. There are things at work that connects all these characters, and King Durin and Prince Durin suspect that the elves are up to something, just like the dwarves have been up to something. And he says, intuition is a powerful tonic. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to discussing episode 5. Please join us on the next episode of The Last Alliance. Thank you for joining our fellowship on this episode of The Last Alliance, a Rings of Power podcast.
And if you enjoyed this episode even half as well as you should have liked, or liked half of it half as well as it deserved, please subscribe, comment, and share.
We'll see you next time.